You must get this by heart." She went upstairs, leaving him to study it; but by the time she had reached the second floor, she heard him following her. "What's the matter?" said she. "I can say it," he replied, and repeated it distinctly, though he could not have read it more than twice. But there has been another story of his infant precocity, generally circulated and generally believed, the truth of which I am to refute upon his own authority. It is told, that, when a child of 3 years old, he chanced to tread upon a duckling, the 11th of a brood, and killed it; upon which, it is said, he dictated to his mother the following epitaph: "Here lies good Master Duck, whom Samuel Johnson trod on; if it had lived, it had been good luck, for then we'd had an odd one." There is surely internal evidence that this little composition combines in it what no child of 3 years old could produce, without an extension of its faculties by immediate inspiration; yet Mrs. Lucy Porter, Dr. Johnson's step daughter, positively maintained to me, in his presence, that there could be no doubt of the truth of this anecdote, for she had heard it from his mother. So difficult is it to obtain an authentic relation of facts, and such authority may there be for error; for he assured me that his father made the verses, and wished to pass them for his child's. He added, "My father was a foolish old man, that is to say, foolish in talking of his children." Note. This anecdote of the duck, though disproved by internal and external evidence, has nevertheless, upon supposition of its truth, been made the foundation of the following ingenious and fanciful reflections of Miss Seward, amongst the communications concerning Dr. Johnson with which she has been pleased to favour me. These infant numbers contain the seeds of those propensities which through his life so strongly marked his character, of that poetic talent which afterwards bore such rich and plentiful fruits. For, excepting his orthographic works, everything which Dr. Johnson wrote was poetry, whose essence consists not in numbers or in jingle, but in the strength and glow of a fancy, to which all the stores of nature and of art stand in prompt administration, and in an eloquence which conveys their blended illustrations in a language more tuneable than needs or rhyme or verse to add more harmony. The above little verses also show that superstitious bias which grew with his growth and strengthened with his strength, and, of late years particularly, injured his happiness by presenting to him the gloomy side of religion, rather than that bright and cheering one which gilds the period of closing life with the light of pious hope. This is so beautifully imagined that I would not suppress it; but, like many other theories, it is deduced from a supposed fact, which is, indeed, a fiction. End of note. Young Johnson had the misfortune to be much afflicted with a scrofula, or king's evil, which disfigured a countenance naturally well formed, and hurt his visual nerves so much, that he did not see at all with one of his eyes, though its appearance was a little different from that of the other. There is amongst his prayers one inscribed, "When my eye was restored to its use," which ascertains a defect that many of his friends knew he had, though I never perceived it. I supposed him to be only near sighted, and indeed I must observe, that in no other respect could I discern any defect in his vision. On the contrary, the force of his attention and perceptive quickness made him see and distinguish all manner of objects, whether of nature or of art, with a nicety that is rarely to be found. When he and I were travelling in the Highlands of Scotland, and I pointed out to him a mountain which I observed resembled a cone, he corrected my inaccuracy, by shewing me that it was indeed pointed at the top, but that one side of it was larger than the other. and the ladies with whom he was acquainted agree that no man was more nicely and minutely critical in the elegance of female dress. When I found that he saw the romantic beauties of Islam in Derbyshire much better than I did, I told him that he resembled an able performer upon a bad instrument. How false and contemptible then are all the remarks which have been made to the prejudice either of his candour or of his philosophy, founded upon a supposition that he was almost blind. It has been said that he contracted this grievous malady from his nurse, his mother yielding to the superstitious notion, which, it is wonderful to think, prevailed so long in this country, as to the virtue of the regal touch, a notion which our kings encouraged, and to which a man of such inquiry and such judgment as Carte could give credit, carried him to London, where he was actually touched by Queen Anne. Mrs. Johnson, indeed, as Mr. Hector informed me, acted by the advice of the celebrated Sir John Floyer, then a physician in Lichfield. Johnson used to talk of this very frankly, and Mrs. Piozzi has preserved his very picturesque description of the scene, as it remained upon his fancy. Being asked if he could remember Queen Anne, he had, he said, a confused but somehow a sort of solemn recollection of a lady in diamonds and a long black hood. This touch, however, was without any effect. I ventured to say to him, in allusion to the political principles in which he was educated, and of which he ever retained some odour, that, his mother had not carried him far enough, she should have taken him to Rome. He was first taught to read English by Dame Oliver, a widow, who kept a school for young children in Lichfield. He told me she could read the black letter, and asked him to borrow for her, from his father, a Bible in that character. When he was going to Oxford, she came to take leave of him, brought him, in the simplicity of her kindness, a present of gingerbread, and said he was the best scholar she ever had. He delighted in mentioning this early compliment, adding with a smile that this was as high a proof of his merit as he could conceive. His next instructor in English was a master, whom, when he spoke of him to me, he familiarly called Tom Brown, who said he published a spelling book, and dedicated it to the universe, but I fear no copy of it can now be had. He began to learn Latin with Mr. Hawkins, usher or undermaster of Lichfield School, a man, said he, very skilful in his little way. With him he continued 2 years, and then rose to be under the care of Mr. Hunter, the head master, who, according to his account, was very severe, and wrong-headedly severe. He used, said he, to beat us unmercifully, and he did not distinguish between ignorance and negligence, for he would beat a boy equally for not knowing a thing as for neglecting to know it. He would ask a boy a question, and if he did not answer it, he would beat him, without considering whether he had an opportunity of knowing how to answer it. For instance, he would call up a boy and ask him Latin for a candlestick, which the boy could not expect to be asked. Now, sir, if a boy could answer every question, there would be no need of a master to teach him. It is, however, but justice to the memory of Mr. Hunter to mention that though he might err in being too severe, the school of Lichfield was very respectable in his time. The late Dr. Taylor, prebendary of Westminster, who was educated under him, told me that he was an excellent master, and that his ushers were most of them men of eminence; that Holbrook, one of the most ingenious men, best scholars, and best preachers of his age, was usher during the greatest part of the time that Johnson was at school. Then came Hague, of whom as much might be said, with the addition that he was an elegant poet. Hague was succeeded by Green,